Hello and welcome to the TorchCast. I'm Dwayne Lester, editor of the Missouri Torch. Right now, the Missouri Supreme Court is looking at a lawsuit filed by a felon who wants to have his Second Amendment rights restored in the state of Missouri. This goes back to the Missouri's Amendment 5, which passed just last year. Missouri Senator Schaefer was in the news recently when he was quoted as saying that felons aren't citizens. He joins us today to explain what that means, if he said it, and if so, what he meant by it. Senator Schaefer, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right to the heart of the matter. Are felons citizens?
Well, sure, they're citizens of the United States if they're otherwise U.S. citizens. The issue that you get into is you have certain provisions of the Missouri Constitution, for example, the right to due process of law, that uses the term person. And then you have Article 1, Section 23, which since 1875 has used the word citizen for the right to keep and bear arms. And there's a body of case law out there that basically says citizens are people that possess all fully vested rights, and those that don't are something other. So in this legal argument, the issue isn't whether or not someone is actually a citizen of the U.S. or are they existent or non-existent. The question is, what rights go along with your current status? It's really a minor point in the brief. The other points, obviously, I believe, are much more important in protection of the Second Amendment rights as they pertain to Amendment 5. But that issue the court's going to have to deal with is, for example, there clearly is at some point a time when felons cannot possess firearms. For example, when they're incarcerated. Yet, when you have due process of law, even when you're incarcerated, you have the rights to due process of law. You have the right to your freedom of religion, which also uses the word person in the Missouri Constitution. So the idea is if you have less than all fully vested rights, which a convicted felon does, at least for some period of time, what is your status and what is that period of time? So I think what it really gets to is the issue. We added the language to Article 1, Section 23, which creates a strict scrutiny standard. And what we're really trying to get to is rather than these blanket laws of all one group can have arms, all another group cannot, it's much more complicated than that. And the courts are going to have to do heavy lifting under a very strict standard of strict scrutiny to make sure that they protect the Second Amendment rights of all Missourians. And so, for example, when you're a convicted felon and you're incarcerated and arguably for some period of time you are not allowed to have a firearm, those rights do get restored at some point, and the courts are going to have to make a determination of where that line is.
So obviously there's a difference between nonviolent felons and violent felons. If someone's committed a nonviolent felony, can you think of a good reason why they shouldn't be allowed to bear arms?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a question of, what is a violent felony and what isn't. So, for example, child molestation, somebody who's a pedophile, wouldn't be necessarily a violent felon, depending on what their crime was, whether or not it involved direct contact or not. But arguably, that is a group of people that probably shouldn't own firearms. And also, you have others that may be involved in crime that can be perpetuated with the use of weapons. And it's not just firearms, whether that's any weapon. But the question is, what do you do with someone like the gentleman who was in the news about 3 months ago? I believe he lived in Indiana. He was a gentleman in his 60s who had no criminal record and was convicted of a felony of selling an orchid without a permit. An orchid, the flower, an orchid. And yet, that's someone that's going to be prohibited from owning a firearm under federal law and presumably under state law as well in Indiana for the rest of his life for self-protection and other purposes. I don't think anyone thinks that's reasonable. So the question is, it's very, very hard to draw a bright line test. And the courts, under the standard that we passed in Amendment 5, are going to have to do the heavy lifting, as I said, and determine where those lines are. Because the other issue is what happens when you get someone that may have, for example, a drug felony. And let's say they get it when they're very young, they go on for a period of 10 years, however long, have no further evidence that they're going to commit any crimes, yet arguably they are prohibited from owning a firearm for the rest of their lives for self-protection, for hunting, for any other purpose. There has to be a point at which there is a review of that. And that's where I think the courts are going to have to step in under Amendment 5 and make a determination of what's reasonable and what isn't.
Well, that brings up an interesting point and a question I was hoping to raise with you. I have a friend who in his youth committed some crimes and is now considered a nonviolent felon. Because of that, his wife is not allowed to bear arms or is not allowed to own a gun So I was curious whether you thought the spouses of nonviolent felons should be prohibited from exercising their Second Amendment rights too.
Well, I think what that comes from probably is the law that says that you as the felon can't have one in your house, and so that applies to everyone in the house. And obviously one thing we've done in Amendment 5 is strengthen the language that makes it very, very clear it is a personal and individual right. And so I think it would call those laws into question. Now, keep in mind, what we're talking about here is everything at the state level. You're still going to have a whole body of law at the federal level that still makes it impossible or illegal for a felon to possess a firearm. All we can really do at the state level is address what we do under state law. But I think, for example, laws like that, where you may have one individual who should have all of their rights, and yet they are impaired because they're married to someone and live in the same house. That's a question where the courts are going to have to say, does that meet a strict scrutiny test? Is there a compelling governmental interest, and is it narrowly tailored to keep a firearm away from a spouse of a felon? I think the government would have a hard time on that. But again, these things are going to be fact-specific. That's why we put the language in Amendment 5 to allow for the courts to make these determinations, but err on the side of protecting the individual right.
Unfortunately, too often these days, facts take a back seat to opinion in the court of law. So hopefully they will come down correctly this time. Look, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person. I was wondering if you could tell me more about the committee that you were just named to chair regarding Ferguson.
Yeah, that's a committee. It's the Governmental Accountability Committee. It was actually formed in law in 2004, and the committee has never been put together before. This is the first time the committee's been used. And in talking to both the pro tem of the Senate, Tom Dempsey, and Speaker of the House, Tim Jones, as well as the incoming Speaker, John Deal, leadership wanted to put this committee together for the first time to look into the response to Ferguson, particularly in light that we're getting a lot of complaints from locals, whether that be mayors, local law enforcement, local citizens, about how things were handled in the aftermath of Ferguson. And again, not just Ferguson, but the surrounding area in light of what happened in Ferguson. And so we're going to put that committee together. We met last week for the first time. As the law states, our very first meeting is an organizational meeting to elect leadership. I was elected chairman of that committee, and I look forward to working with everyone on that committee to, as the statute says, is our charge, hold everyone accountable and find out exactly what happened. I suspect that in the coming weeks, we will probably be getting a lot of documents from the Highway Patrol, from the National Guard, from the Department of Public Safety, as well as some local entities, and start piecing through what it looks like happened before we start calling in witnesses. But it is our intention to have public hearings and bring in witnesses and the public to testify before that committee.
Any idea when the first hearing would be?
I think when we obviously the session starts June 7th, we've got 7 House members and 7 senators on this committee, and they're from all over the state. And so it's much easier and more cost efficient for them to really dig into this after they're already back at the Capitol on January 7th. So I would suspect in that first week or two, we'll have another meeting, particularly to define the scope of what documents we want to request and get those requests out to the appropriate agencies.
What do you say to critics who say this is just a partisan witch hunt?
Back in 2004, when this committee was put together for the purpose of holding governmental entities accountable, a lot of aspects to that, not only decisions that were made in given circumstances, but how much of the public's money has been spent on any one or multiple things. And so when we have the governor who wanted to call us back into a special session, even though he still had, according to my calculation, over $18 million left in emergency funds, so obviously there was no need to call us back, but we did find out that it appears that on the response to Ferguson, the governor's already spent about $16 million of the public's money. And I think that when you look at what we saw on national TV on that Monday night, where many of us sat in our living rooms with our families and watched multiple felony after felony be committed on national TV, yet we're paying $16 million to the men and women of the Guard and the Highway Patrol and other efforts, there was a question of what has that money gone to and what's happening. And I want to be very clear because the General Assembly has the utmost support for the men and women of the Missouri Guard and the Highway Patrol, and we will always support them. But we can certainly look into what they were directed to do or not do in light of the fact that they were called there by the governor and they're spending an awful lot of public funds.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I I don't know that anybody is looking to indict or to blame the National Guard for what's going on, but it's more of an attempt to find an understanding of why, when there's 1,500 National Guardsmen standing by, none of them were ever brought into action, especially when the mayors of Ferguson and Delwood both say that they were promised National Guardsmen if needed. So, the question...
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the other issue, too, is we've heard complaints from the mayor of Delwood and from the mayor of Ferguson that frankly, they couldn't find the governor that evening, couldn't get him on the phone. And that's a real problem, too, and something that we need to look into.
Yeah, and the question that I find most intriguing is the firefighters say that they were promised protection if they were going to go out and fight these fires. And when it came time, they had no protection, which was evident by the hoses just left scattered around. So the questions that I have are, when did the plan change? Who made the call? And why weren't the firefighters notified?
Right. The firefighters have been very vocal in their disappointment of how things were handled. But those are all very good questions. And those are the questions that we will get into as we move down the road with this committee. Anytime you do an investigation like this, and I've been involved in many, particularly the investigation we did in the General Assembly on E. coli at the Lake of the Ozarks. In response to that, we got 60,000 documents from the Department of Natural Resources that Senator Lauger and I had to go through as part of that investigation. 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when we discovered in the Appropriations Committee that I chair that the entire concealed carry list of all Missourians who have a concealed carry permit had been given to the federal government on 3 different occasions, our response, the response to our request for documents from the Department of Revenue was 34 bankers' boxes of documents, which we then had to go through. So one thing I do know, having been down this road before, it takes a lot of resources and time to get it right. And our goal here is to piece together what happened, as the name of the committee implies, provide accountability for the Missourians who pay for all this effort. And we're going to do that. It may take a little time to go through those documents and put it together, but we will get to the truth.
Well, it appears you're going to have a very interesting year.
It'll be busy.
Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And I appreciate everyone out there who took the time to watch this inaugural episode of the TorchCast. I'm Dwayne Lester, editor of the Missouri Torch. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more of them in the future, please consider making a donation to the Missouri Torch here. And please subscribe to our new YouTube channel and visit us at themissouritorch.com.